Welcome to the premiere of Deborah Interviews on the Immigration Law Channel. Hi, everybody. This is Deborah. I am excited to join the Legal Broadcast Network and the Immigration Law Channel to bring to you on demand 24/7 news and information on what is one of the most important issues in our country, immigration. Check in daily right here to Deborah Interviews on the Immigration Law Channel for the latest. Right now on the show. Okay, so I think your positions on immigration really could be considered rebellious. Let's start right there. The U.S. has a debt to pay to Mexico. Explain that. What do you think the real issue is with those who say go home to the Mexicans? But why can't they simply come to America legally like many of the other immigrants before them? Right now on the show, America's relationship to Mexico is oftentimes downplayed in the midst of the immigration debate. My guest today says perhaps we should look in the mirror. What part does America play in the illegal entrance of our neighbors south of the border? Here to talk about America's relationship to Mexico and its effect on immigration is Professor Bill Ong Hing. Hing is a professor of law at the University of San Francisco, where he teaches rebellious lawyering, immigration law and policy, evidence, and negotiation. Professor Hing, immigration in a moment, but first, rebellious lawyering. What are you teaching the students at the University of San Francisco?
Interesting. Actually, the term rebellious lawyering, most people think, it's about rebelling against institutions and fighting the good fight, which it does include elements of that, but actually the rebellion is against conventional lawyering, so that instead of riding in like a knight in shining armor, a rebellious lawyer is very respectful of the clients and work with the clients in problem solving, and in fact the client may help to resolve the problem herself or himself, in addition to looking for allies to help collaborate in solving the bigger challenges that client communities face. So it's about rebelling against the conventional way of lawyering.
So how does that play out with immigration? How do you work with the immigrant for rebellious lawyering?
Well, we firmly believe that part of the problem in Washington, D.C., including many of my immigrant rights friends in Washington, D.C., is that they actually don't listen to the people on the ground, that they don't tap into the vast resources of the opinions, the knowledge, the energy of the immigrants themselves. And so a rebellious immigrant lawyer would actually work with immigrants in trying to achieve social change and immigration policy change.
Okay, so I think your positions on immigration really could be considered rebellious. Let's see here. You advocate for a North American union that could lead to open labor migration. You advocate for amnesty for the over 11 million undocumented immigrants currently in the United States. You call Mexican immigrants economic refugees, and here's what you say, I'll quote here, "There is a good argument that the U.S. has an historical debt to pay for what it has done to the agricultural sector in Mexico." Let's start right there. The U.S. has a debt to pay to Mexico. Explain that.
Well, NAFTA, which was the North American Free Trade Agreement that was signed into law by Canada, United States, and Mexico in the early 1990s, the American public was led to believe that that would resolve the undocumented immigration challenge, thinking that, this is going to open up markets, not just in Mexico, but in the United States for Mexican manufacturers and Mexican producers. So everyone thought the jobs were going to be created in Mexico. The problem is, and probably one of the foremost examples, is that behind the scenes and in the small print in NAFTA, the United States was permitted to continue to subsidize U.S. agriculture and corn farmers, for example, whereas Mexico was not able to continue doing that. So that, unbelievable as it may seem, today, some 15 years after NAFTA has been in effect, Mexico now imports over 95% of its corn from the United States. Mexican corn farmers have not been able to compete. They've actually gone out of business. And so their workers are left without work. And so where do they look for employment? They look north of the border.
And so you're saying that has done what to immigration in the United States?
Well, it's increased the push factors from Mexico for people to come to the United States looking for work. NAFTA is just one example. The World Trade Organization, which the United States encouraged Mexico to also join, it actually, again, it's hurt Mexico in terms of manufacturing. Manufacturing plants in Mexico have closed as over the last dozen years or so, China and other countries of Asia have cheaper workers than Mexico. And so that if Americans look at the clothes that they have on their backs, they'll have to admit that a lot of the clothes that they have has been imported from Asia, not Mexico. And so another example of how Mexico has been caught into this trap of worldwide globalization, and the economic impact has affected its workers. They've lost work.
And so we have heard a lot about NAFTA and its effect on the United States and its effect on Mexico. But what do we do now? The debt to pay. How do we pay that debt? How do we make it right?
Okay. First of all, I wish people would calm down when it comes to the flow of undocumented workers in the United States. And the reason I wish they would calm down is I think that if they understood the reasons that the folks are coming here are because of economic pressures that are well beyond their ability to control their own lives. When you're absolutely right at the beginning when you introduced me and you said that I'm for a North American union that would lead to labor migration. You're right that I say that I'm for a legalization or amnesty program for the 10 to 12 million undocumented. But I'm actually more for the right of Mexican workers to stay home and to work in Mexico. So when I talk about a North American union, I think of the European Union, which is not a perfect example, but when the European Union allowed in poorer countries into the European Union, such as Spain, Portugal, Greece, Ireland, before they allowed them in, the wealthy nations infused big investments into those countries so that those countries could create jobs of their own. And guess what? Whenever those poor countries were allowed in, labor migration was open to all those countries. But in the EU today, fewer than 2% of people born in the EU live in another EU country. They would rather stay home. And I feel the same thing would happen if we really developed a North American Union where we worked on the economies of all three countries, that Mexicans, when you interview them, the vast majority would rather stay home. They would rather be home and feed their families with employment home. So, yes, I'm for a North American Union. Two things would result from that: open labor migration, but more jobs in Mexico and less of a pressure to leave Mexico to come to the United States.
When we talk about NAFTA, when we talk about the North American Union, there's a lot of conspiracy theorists out who say that the government is conspiring to bring the three countries together, Mexico, the United States, and Canada, for that North American Union. I know that some people are advocating for that, but do you see that happening? Is the government going that way?
Well, I don't think that the government is going that way in the way that the conspiracy theorists are thinking. I do think that there are smart people in Canada and the United States and Mexico that understand that it's important to help Mexico develop jobs and work on its economy. Listen, I'm the first critic of Mexico as well. I think that the Mexican government has had some history of corruption and ineptitude, so that I certainly would not just throw money at the government of Mexico. I think that we need to sit down and figure out how to do this in a way that will put pressure on the government of Mexico. Now it's not unprecedented that when the World Bank gives money, they try to put pressure on governments. In the EU again, serious pressure on countries to adopt economic policies, human rights policies, environmental policies, so before they're allowed in to the EU and before they're allowed to accept the cash. And I think that we need to at least study, we need to at least develop a commission to figure out how this can be done. When I've given this pitch and I talk about, quote unquote, bailing out Mexico, people always say to me, well, how can you bail out Mexico when the United States is having its own problem? And I understand that. Everybody's caught in this worldwide economic decline. But if we don't start at least seriously talking about this, we're never going to resolve this challenge. When I talk about amnesty or legalization for undocumented, I don't actually talk about that in isolation either because, again, unlike many of my immigrant rights friends in Washington who are pushing for amnesty, I'm pushing for legalization, amnesty at the same time as we look at what's happening at the Mexican economy. Because if we only grant amnesty and put more money at the border for border enforcement, believe me, in a few years we're going to have another undocumented problem. I think that we cannot just grant amnesty. We cannot just throw money at border enforcement without talking about how to help Mexico with its economy. Otherwise, we're going to be in the same situation again in a few years.
So what do you think? You call Mexican immigrants, you call them economic refugees. That's pretty strong. Explain that for us.
Well, it's actually a term that I borrowed from another academic named George Lakoff. He coined the phrase, but I think he's absolutely right that people who are coming from Mexico, they're trying to feed their families. They're not coming here to commit crimes. They're not coming here to rip off the welfare system. They're coming here to find work for the reasons that I outlined at the beginning, because of the economic pressures that have been put on them to migrate. To me, it's very much akin to political pressures of people that are fleeing communism or fleeing repression in other forms. Those folks are labeled refugees. Well, I believe the same thing is happening in Mexico, that because of those pressures, those economic pressures, people want to flee in order to put money in their pockets and food on the table of their families. And so to me, it's very, very analogous to being a refugee, and these folks are economic refugees.
Those who would say that we need to decrease the number of immigrants in the United States, not just illegal, but legal as well, they say that's not our problem. You know, what Mexicans are experiencing in Mexico or any other race of people are experiencing in their home countries, that's not our problem, and we can't take on everybody else's issue. But then when you look at what's really happening and how America is infused, especially with our neighbors south of the border, what do you think the real issue is with those who say go home to the Mexicans? What is the real issue with a North American Union, with a free flowing of migrants throughout the three countries?
Well, let's be honest. The people who tout the anti-immigrant line, they are made up of I'm sure they're made up of a diverse group of individuals. Some of them, I think, are misled by the economic arguments that they think that immigrants hurt the economy, and all major empirical studies demonstrate that the economic argument doesn't hold, that in fact immigrants help our economy. Even today, in the bad economic decline, there are still many, many jobs that Americans don't take, that only low-wage immigrant workers will take. A lot of people who are in that anti-immigrant side, they believe that people don't come here and they don't want to learn English. But again, that's not true. Community colleges have long waiting lists of people who want to learn English. When you interview, and I wish people would talk more to immigrants, when you interview immigrants, you find out that they want to learn English. They want their children to do well in school. They want their children to learn English, of course. So that just doesn't hold. Unfortunately, there's an element in the anti-immigrant community that, let's face it, they don't like the race of the folks that are coming here. And I'm talking about legal and undocumented immigrants. And there are some folks that continue to look at America through a white Western and Northern European lens. And that's what they think America has been and should continue to be. They don't really believe the United States is a land of immigrants beyond Western and Northern Europe. And so to those folks, I say it's inevitable, unfortunately, for them that things are going to change, that through legal immigration, through refugee policy, it's already started. And we waste a lot of money through enforcement. We waste a lot of time and effort bickering over all this, and what we ought to be doing is embracing the change and working with immigrants so that we can work on inculcating them on the values that we call American values and work with them about integrating into our society. That's how we really should spend our time.
But why can't they simply come to America legally like many of the other immigrants before them?
Well, when people ask me that question, why are they all just undocumented? Well, what you don't realize is there are numerical limitations. There are backlogs. There's quotas that are very difficult to satisfy. The waiting list for many countries in categories such as for siblings and for the relatives, for sons and daughters, those backlogs run anywhere from 5 to 25 years in some cases. Some of the categories of immigration from Mexico and the Philippines are 15 to 20 years. And so it's just not that simple to fill in the forms and become an immigrant overnight.
So what do? We know that reform has been discussed, talked about, but we don't have it yet. Every president has promised it. Obama promised it within his first year. That first year is gone. He said, okay, first term, he's got 2 years left. What do we do about immigration to work within the laws that we have to rectify this problem with illegal immigrants now?
Well, I think that what I'm proposing, of course, is that we sit down and look at a long-term solution with respect to Mexico and its economy, but that's not going to solve the problem overnight. Unfortunately, there's nothing that's going to solve the problem overnight. I think that every year, even under this administration, the Obama administration, and especially under the George Bush administration, there has been billions and billions of dollars expended and appropriated for interior enforcement and border enforcement, and that hasn't done anything to slow the flow of undocumented folks coming into the United States. And so that's why states are doing what they're doing, trying to keep people out of the states, but most of that is going to be thrown out as unconstitutional. So the answer to your question is, in order for something to get done in the next couple of years, people are going to have to wake up and realize, what we've done in the past isn't solving the problem. Let's roll up our sleeves and figure out how to either open the visa system a little bit more to let in the workers that we need, but in my opinion, even that isn't going to be enough, that we really are going to have to sit down and work on helping to create jobs on both sides of the border and get Canada involved. And Canada actually is very interested in this proposal, and get them involved to once and for all address the root causes of immigration pressures.
It sounds like we are years away from solving the problem of illegal immigration in the United States.
We've got a big challenge ahead.
Yeah, thank you so very much, Professor Bill Ong Hing, for joining me here on Deborah Interviews.